But while Perry's actions have been seen by some as bullying, Craig Robinson, the founder of conservative website Iowa Republican, says the indictment, kind of ironically, it's helped him. I think people kind of see this as an overreach, and he's kind of the victim. Besides the charges being thin at best and spurious at worst, a Christian Science Monitor writer says Perry has done himself a favor by coming out in front of the charges. Perry's not running from the publicity around the indictment so much as trying to spin it to his advantage, framing it as an attack on what he calls his legitimate use of political power.
Let's face it, corruption and politics often go hand in hand, and often it's easy to connect the two. But like anything else, proof remains in the actual pudding, the facts. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie still faces plenty of questions about a bridge. Texas Governor Rick Perry preparing a defense on felony counts in Texas. And former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich sits in prison, awaiting word on an appeals court decision that could reverse his conviction for shaking down campaign donors and trying to sell Barack Obama's vacant Senate seat. He maintains his innocence. And the lead defense attorney for the governor joins us here in MidPoint to dig into such cases and how these and other evidences can actually be uncovered and put to good use. Maybe even sometimes mishandled. Welcome, criminal defense attorney Sam Adams Jr. to MidPoint. Sam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sam, how do you think they're handling it thus far when you look at what Rick Perry is doing in Texas? The smiles, certainly, the coming out, the bravado, basically saying that we're innocent from an attorney's standpoint and having dealt with the political machine before. How's he doing?
I think he's coming out correctly. And this kind of a thing, you want to get out in front of it. You got to understand that when somebody is charged with a crime, the vast majority of the population believe from the beginning that they're guilty. And you got to get a voice out there. And that's what Rick Perry is doing. He's getting out there, saying he didn't do this, explaining what his motives were in asking for that prosecutor to step down and not providing the $7.5 million. I think he's doing a good job in getting out in front of it, letting people know where he stands, and let the chips fall where they may.
Now, when the prosecutor came into the Blagojevich case here, and I have in front of me some of the comments here, the assistant U.S. attorney, Chris Niewohner, I believe it is, didn't say much about the fact of what he did. It said it was only that he made the effort. Quote, you don't have to be a successful criminal to be a criminal. What about that effort itself? Prosecutors coming in now and saying just that. It's not that you actually did anything, but it's the effort itself. How do you fight that then as a defense attorney?
Well, one of the things that we had to do in Blagojevich, and I'll note this, it's on appeal right now, and in fact, the United States Supreme Court in a case called McCutcheon's came out and said what we were saying the entire time was that it's not just an effort that you have to show, it's an effort to do one for the other. It has to be an express quid pro quo. You're asking for campaign contributions in Blagojevich's case, and on the other hand, you're asking that the governor do something for those campaign contributions. Here with Rick Perry, it's a little bit different. Here what they're saying is he did an executive power which was veto or threatened to veto money. That's a complete political action. It's not asking for money. It's not asking for private citizens to come forward and give money for a campaign contribution. He has a right to line item veto that $7.5 million. That's why I think it's important that people understand what this case is about. They are really, in my opinion, charging him with a political act and not one of a criminal nature.
How do you then make juries understand that? Because having covered enough cases in my lifetime, I know certainly that you got to get the jury to buy into whatever you're looking at, and you have to make sure that they understand it. And already it seems like there's a whole lot of misinformation going around here.
You're 100% correct. At the end of the day, can you sell whatever position you are? Here in Blagojevich, the government, I represent him on the first case, could not sell to 12 people that this was a crime in and of itself. They were hung on 23 of the 24, and nothing of the substantive counts was he ever found guilty of during the first trial. With Rick Perry, they're going to have to make them understand here there's a big difference between politics and criminal activity. Now, what Rick's going to have to do is come out, and he's got some very good lawyers. In fact, I read their brief today asking to dismiss the case in and of itself. But when you're looking at those 12 people, they have to understand that this was an act that he had a right to do. And as governor, he's going to come out and say, not only did he have a right to do it, he should have done it because he did not want the people of that county represented by someone charged and convicted of DUI. That's the nuance that you have to make those 12 people understand, the difference between politics and criminal activity.
Again, we're talking about getting out in front of certain things. Mark Fabiani is now on the governor's team. He has deep ties to the Democratic Party, is best known for legal and crisis communication expertise. I would imagine that from an attorney's standpoint, your opinion as well, that's a pretty smart move and a pretty savvy move to make right there, because you still have to put the right people on the team to convince the jury.
You're 100% correct. And looking at this and going through it, this is going to be a bipartisan effort. What we do not want, what we cannot have in this country, are the prosecutors making the decisions for our elected officials. While we understand that there's corruption, while we want to root out corruption, real corruption, where there is pay-to-pay politics, what we cannot have is a politician saying, oh, I don't want to do what's right for the people because I may be prosecuted for that. And I think you're going to see bipartisan support on this from the Democrats and from the Republicans saying, look, this is too far. Life is not cyclical, it's elliptical. You go way too far. And what I think's happening here are the prosecutors are now pushing the envelope of what they consider to be criminal activity in political areas. And we're going to have to push back on that, and you're going to get bipartisan support.
30 seconds. Do you see anything here that you have been able to discern thus far reading about the case that could be a problem for the governor?
Certainly, one of the problems that he's going to face is simply being charged with the criminal offense as a politician is a very difficult thing to overcome. I recently represented someone here in Chicago that was a state representative, and that was one of the problems that we have. When you say politician and put corruption behind it, people automatically have that feeling, oh, he must have done it. They're going to have to overcome that in Texas. They're going to have to overcome that connection. As we started this program off, you can make that connection very easily. And those 12 people that are going to judge this are going to have to get beyond that bias and just go on the facts.
Sam Adams Jr., we thank you so much for joining us. We understand that you're waiting, of course, for some news on the Blagojevich case. We'll stay in touch. Thanks again.
Yes, we are. Thank you very much.
Now for the current legal side of the Perry case as well. A pleasure to welcome in Newsmax legal expert and professor at Harvard Law School, Alan Dershowitz. Alan, a pleasure to get a chance to talk with you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I was listening to the previous segment and heard that you mentioned that Mark Fabiani has now been made part of the team. It's a brilliant, brilliant move. Mark was my research assistant at Harvard. He was my assistant on the Von Bulow case and several other cases. He is one of the smartest lawyers I know. He was also Bill Clinton's lawyer and kind of crisis advisor during the Monica Lewinsky matter. And boy, I'll tell you, if anybody I love were in trouble, I'd want Mark Fabiani on the case. So he's a very, very, very good addition to that team.
Aren't we talking, too, about what is now one of the great words I love watching people use anymore, the optics? Because now once the jury knows that a Democrat is on the other side, someone who actually has deep ties to the Democratic Party, that makes an impact on a jury, doesn't it?
I think it does. I don't think this case is ever getting to a jury, but you never know in Texas. This statute is so clearly unconstitutional on its face. It basically would make illegal almost any threat of a veto by any public official. Public officials use the threat of vetoes all the time to get the legislature to change legislation. Congressmen, senators use the threat to vote against confirmation or other kinds of things in order to get what they want. It's called hardball politics. And the idea that this statute criminalizes that is absurd on its face. And if I were a judge, I would not allow the indictment to go any further than it's already gone.
Alan, only got about 2 minutes here, but I do need to get you to comment on this. I'm going to read a comment here. This comes from author, TV political analyst, communications, and PR expert James Moore. This was a commentary in the Huffington Post titled, "Why Rick Perry Will Be Convicted." And here's the quote. First, he, Governor Perry, used the veto to threaten a public office holder. This is abuse of the power of his office. Presidents and governors frequently use the possibility of vetoes to change the course of legislation, but that is considerably different than trying to force an elected office holder to resign. What Perry did, if true, can be politely called blackmail, and when he sent emissaries to urge Lemberg to quit, even after his veto, he may have indulged in bribery, quote unquote. I got to get your reaction to that.
Well, the guy, whoever said that, doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, he would have flunked any law school course. That's absurd. There's no difference between using the threat of a veto to get the legislation that you want and using the threat of a veto to try to get rid of somebody who had abused the public trust by driving drunk and then mouthing off to the cops. There's absolutely no difference from a legal point of view between those two kinds of things. And the fact that he threatened a public official, of course, that's what politics is all about. You try to get public officials to do what you want them to do, and you use the power that's been given to you by the Constitution to do that. That's called politics. It's not called crime.
Alan, I always tell people I'm not an attorney. I only play one on TV on occasion from time to time. Don't you wish people would stop playing television attorney every now and then?
Well, it's, I get so upset when I watch people playing television attorneys and saying things and predicting the outcome. I wish we would have a technique where we could play them back after it turns out that they were wrong.
Oh, we can do that. We have that tape. We have that power, and trust me, we intend to use it from time to time.
Good.
Alan, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Alan Dershowitz, he's a special contributor right here at Newsmax.com. You and the Law also comes up a little bit later on, right here on MidPoint. Okay, later on this hour, a president more concerned with climate change and executive orders than a solid plan to fight murderous terrorists. That's how a lot of people see it. And after the break, take a break. Why not? Relax, chill. Here comes the long weekend. We have to get you ready for it. It's another trip to Outland. No gas needed when MidPoint continues.